Have you ever wondered why the kingdom of heaven seems so elusive, so distant, despite years of spiritual seeking? What if I told you that the very way you've been taught to think about heaven has been keeping you from experiencing its divine power in your life right now? For centuries, spiritual seekers have been searching for the kingdom of heaven as if it were a distant location, a place reserved for the afterlife, or a reward waiting for us somewhere beyond the clouds. We've been conditioned to look outward, to wait patiently for some future moment when we'll finally cross the threshold into divine reality. But what if this fundamental misunderstanding has been the very thing blocking your experience of spiritual fulfillment? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the globe. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Has this ever happened to you? You pray fervently, asking God for healing, for abundance, for peace, only to feel like your words are disappearing into an empty void. You wonder why divine presence feels so inaccessible, why there seems to be such an unbridgeable gap between you and God. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely transform your spiritual practice and your experience of the divine in everyday life. Joel Goldsmith, one of the most profound mystical teachers of the 20th century, revealed a truth that mystical Christians have understood for ages. The kingdom of heaven is not a location at all. It's a state of consciousness, a realm of spiritual awareness that exists within you at this very moment. This isn't merely theological theory or abstract philosophy. This understanding has practical, transformative power that can completely shift your experience of healing, abundance, relationships, and spiritual connection. When you truly grasp that the kingdom of heaven is your own consciousness, you stop looking for divine reality somewhere out there and begin recognizing the perfection that has always been the very essence of your being. What you're about to discover might surprise you, especially if you've spent years in traditional religious settings where heaven is portrayed as distant and separate from your present experience. This teaching isn't new. It's actually an ancient wisdom that has been preserved by mystical traditions throughout the centuries. It's the recognition that Jesus himself pointed to when he said, "The kingdom of God is within you." Imagine what might change in your life if you could access this divine consciousness not after death, not after years of spiritual striving, but right now, in this very moment. How might your approach to challenges transform? How might your prayers evolve from desperate pleading to confident recognition? Now let's explore what happens when you begin to shift your understanding from heaven as a place to heaven as a state of consciousness. A shift that doesn't just change your theology, but transforms your entire experience of life itself. If these teachings about the kingdom of heaven have illuminated something within you, hit subscribe to join our community of spiritual seekers exploring these transformative principles together. When we truly understand that the kingdom of heaven is within, a profound revelation occurs in our spiritual journey. Our entire approach to prayer undergoes a radical transformation. Think about it. How often have we approached prayer as if we're sending messages to a distant deity, begging for intervention, healing, or abundance? We've been taught to pray as if we're separated from the divine by an unbridgeable gap, as if God is somewhere out there while we're down here. This mindset creates an experience of separation that actually blocks the very connection we're seeking. But the hidden truth that mystics have known for centuries is that prayer isn't about convincing a reluctant God to help us. It's about awakening to the divine presence that is already the very essence of our being. This shifts everything. Prayer transforms from pleading to recognition, from asking to awakening. It becomes less about changing God's mind and more about changing our awareness. In this new understanding, We're not trying to reach across some cosmic divide. We're simply turning our attention to what has always been present within our own consciousness. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring something truly remarkable about this inner kingdom. Joel Goldsmith made a profound discovery that this realm of consciousness operates according to entirely different laws than the material world we're accustomed to. This isn't just a minor shift in perspective, it's an entirely different reality operating beneath the surface of our everyday experience. In the material world, we're conditioned to see lack, limitation, disease, and separation everywhere we look. But in this inner kingdom, this state of consciousness, there is no lack. There is no disease. There is no separation from good. This isn't positive thinking or wishful imagination. It's the recognition of a spiritual reality that remains perfect and complete, regardless of material appearances. When we access this kingdom through meditation and spiritual awareness, we begin to bring its reality into our visible experience. The journey isn't about escaping the material world, but about allowing the perfection of the inner kingdom to transform our outer circumstances from within. Think about the impact this understanding could have on your daily decisions and challenges. Instead of constantly battling against material conditions, trying to manipulate external circumstances through force or willpower, you begin working from the level of consciousness itself. You recognize the divine perfection that already exists within your being, and from that recognition, healing, abundance, and harmony begin to flow naturally into your experience. This isn't instantaneous magic. It's a gradual unfolding, a revelation of what has always been true beneath the surface appearances. The veil between these two worlds, the material and the spiritual, begins to thin as your awareness deepens. If you're connecting with these ideas on a deeper level, write in the comments, "I'm awakening to the kingdom within." Now, as we explore how this understanding actually works in practical, everyday situations, let's be clear about what happens when this understanding truly dawns in your consciousness. You don't suddenly become a perfect being who never faces challenges or difficulties. Life doesn't magically become free of obstacles. This isn't about escaping the human experience. It's about transforming it from within. What you gain through this revelation is access to an inner resource that is always available, always present, and always responsive to your recognition. Joel Goldsmith called this the practice of the presence, a continuous awareness of this inner kingdom that becomes the foundation for navigating everything life brings your way. This practice isn't about achieving some idealized spiritual state where problems never touch you. It's about developing a new relationship with challenges when they arise. It's about knowing where to turn first when faced with difficulty. This mindset shift may seem subtle, but its impact on your daily experience can be profound. Think about how this applies to real-world situations. When facing a health crisis, the natural human response is to panic, to become consumed with fear, to see only the material diagnosis and prognosis. But with the practice of the presence, you develop a different initial response. Before being swept away by fear, you turn within to recognize the spiritual truth that exists beyond physical appearances. In the kingdom of heaven within you, there is only wholeness, only divine perfection. This recognition doesn't mean you ignore medical wisdom or practical treatment. Rather, it opens a channel for healing power that transcends material limitations completely. Your actions may look similar on the surface. You might still consult doctors and follow treatment protocols, but these actions now flow from a different source, a deeper knowing. The same principle applies to financial challenges. When confronted with lack, with bills that exceed your income, with unexpected expenses that threaten your security, The practice of the presence means returning first to the consciousness of the inner kingdom where divine supply is infinite and eternally flowing. From this awareness, something remarkable begins to happen. Right action emerges naturally. Opportunities appear that you might have missed if operating solely from fear and lack. Solutions present themselves that weren't visible when viewing the situation only from material consciousness. This is what happens when consciousness itself demonstrates its own abundance, not through force or manipulation, but through spiritual recognition. Behind the scenes of every healing, every financial breakthrough, every restored relationship is this same principle at work. The outward circumstances may vary widely, but the inner journey is consistent. A return to kingdom consciousness as the foundation for all external action. The revelations that come through this practice aren't abstract philosophy, they're practical wisdom that transforms how you navigate everyday challenges. You develop a dual awareness that honors both the practical requirements of the situation and the spiritual truth that transcends appearances. If you've experienced moments where an inner knowing guided you through difficulty, write in the comments, "I've glimpsed the kingdom within." Let's explore now how this understanding gradually develops through consistent practice. The transformation I'm describing doesn't happen overnight. It develops gradually over weeks and months of consistent practice. This isn't a quick fix or an instantaneous enlightenment experience. It's a steady awakening to what has always been true beneath the surface of your awareness. The journey of discovering the kingdom within unfolds step by step, with each recognition building upon the last. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to continue. This journey of discovering the kingdom within, we explore these profound mystical truths that bridge spiritual understanding with practical daily living. You begin with something remarkably simple, acknowledging throughout your day that the kingdom of heaven is within me right now. When you wake each morning, pause for just a moment before diving into your to-do list and affirm this truth. During challenging moments, when stress rises, when conflict emerges, when fear threatens to overtake, you take even 30 seconds to return to this inner kingdom and recognize the truth that exists beyond material appearances. What you'll notice are subtle shifts at first, perhaps a deeper peace in situations that would normally trigger anxiety. Maybe unexpected solutions appearing for persistent problems. You might experience a growing sense of divine guidance in daily decisions. These seemingly small changes are actually profound indicators that you're beginning to live from kingdom consciousness rather than purely from material awareness. The breakthrough comes in realizing that you don't need elaborate rituals or complex spiritual techniques to access this realm. The doorway to the kingdom is always open, waiting only for your recognition. This simplicity is both its power and its challenge. The mind often resists what appears too straightforward, searching instead for complicated systems or secret formulas. But the pathway to spiritual transformation has always been recognition, not creation. This is a crucial distinction in Joel's teaching. You are not attempting to manifest or create the kingdom of heaven through positive thinking or visualization exercises. You're not using spiritual techniques to construct something new. Instead, you're uncovering what has always been present, waiting for your awareness. The kingdom is already established within your consciousness. Your recognition simply removes the veils that have obscured it. As this practice deepens, recognition of the inner kingdom becomes the foundation for everything else in your life. Healing, prosperity, relationships, creative expression, and spiritual growth. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to return to this foundation, to operate from kingdom consciousness rather than material reaction. Every relationship becomes a canvas for expressing the divine qualities you're discovering within your own being. This is where the real alchemy of transformation occurs. Your outer world Gradually begins reflecting the inner kingdom you're recognizing consistently, not because you're manipulating circumstances through mental force, but because consciousness itself is expressing its nature through your experience. The blueprint of your life shifts from fear-based survival to kingdom-based expression. Behind every authentic spiritual journey is this same pathway of recognition. Different traditions may use varying language, but the essential movement is identical. From struggling against appearances to recognizing the divine reality beyond them. From seeking outside yourself to discovering what has always been within. If this understanding of gradual spiritual unfoldment resonates with your experience, write in the comments. I'm walking the path of recognition. Let's look now at how this principle manifests through specific testimonies of transformation. Let me share a testimony that reveals how this understanding works in real life. A woman came to Joel's classes, suffering from a condition that had persisted for 3 years. She had explored every medical approach available, invested significant financial resources, and still received no lasting relief. Her doctors were compassionate, but ultimately told her she would simply have to learn to live with constant pain and limitation. With nothing left to lose, she began studying Joel's teachings about the kingdom of heaven within. At first, she struggled to grasp how consciousness could possibly affect physical conditions. The concept seemed abstract, too mystical to apply to her very real, very painful experience. But she persisted in meditation daily, returning again and again to the recognition that divine perfection existed within her consciousness, regardless of what her body seemed to be telling her about disease and limitation. After 6 weeks of this practice, something shifted internally. She couldn't explain it in medical terms, but she felt a deep peace replace the anxiety she had carried for years. This inner transformation didn't immediately change her physical symptoms, but it changed her relationship to them. She was no longer defined by her condition. Within 3 months, something remarkable began happening. The physical symptoms started diminishing noticeably. Her doctors were puzzled, but pleased. Within 6 months, she was completely free from the condition that had dominated her life and stolen her joy. The healing journey wasn't instantaneous. It unfolded gradually as her consciousness shifted from material limitation to spiritual freedom. What happened with this woman wasn't a magical intervention or random miracle. She awakened to the kingdom consciousness that had always been present within her. She stopped fighting disease from the level of disease and instead recognized the spiritual truth that transcends all material conditions. A similar revelation occurred in the financial realm. A businessman faced imminent bankruptcy after his partner embezzled company funds. Creditors were demanding immediate payment, legal troubles multiplied daily, and he saw no possible path forward through the financial disaster threatening everything he'd built over decades. Someone gave him Joel's recordings about the kingdom of heaven. Initially, he dismissed them as religious philosophy with no practical value for his desperate situation. But having exhausted every material solution, he began listening during his commute and practicing the meditation exercises Joel described. The revelation came when he started recognizing that divine supply existed within his own consciousness, independent of external circumstances. This wasn't wishful thinking, it was tapping into the different laws that govern the inner kingdom. Within 2 weeks of this practice, an unexpected contact led to a business opportunity he had never imagined possible. Within 2 months, he had restructured his company with new partners who shared his vision and integrity. Within 6 months, he had not only recovered from near bankruptcy, but was actually more prosperous than before the crisis. The mindset shift that enabled this breakthrough wasn't about positive visualization or manifesting techniques. It was the discovery that the kingdom within operates by entirely different principles than the material world of limitation and lack. If you've ever experienced an unexpected breakthrough that seemed to defy logical explanation, write in the comments, "I've witnessed kingdom principles at work." Now let's explore the specific practices that develop this consciousness. The power of kingdom consciousness extends beyond physical healing and financial restoration. It transforms our most precious relationships as well. A mother had been estranged from her daughter for 5 years following a bitter conflict that left them both wounded. The separation caused immense suffering for both women, but pride and accumulated hurt prevented any path to reconciliation. The mother had tried everything imaginable: heartfelt letters, mutual friends as intermediaries, family therapy, even surprise visits. Nothing worked. The relationship seemed permanently broken beyond any possibility of repair. In her desperation, she began working with Joel's teachings about the kingdom of heaven. What made the difference in her approach was a profound shift in focus. Instead of continuing to try to change her daughter or manipulate external circumstances, she began recognizing the divine perfection within her own consciousness. She meditated daily on the truth that love, wholeness, and harmony existed in the kingdom within her, regardless of outer appearances. This represented a complete reversal in her strategy. Rather than viewing her daughter as someone who needed to be fixed or convinced, she released her attempts to control outcomes and rested in spiritual truth instead. The inner work wasn't about visualizing a reconciliation scenario. It was about recognizing the underlying spiritual reality that transcended the painful human story. After 4 months of this practice, something unexpected happened. Her daughter called. The conversation was brief, but warm, with none of the defensiveness that had characterized their interactions for years. Over the following months, connection gradually restored. Today, 2 years later, they enjoy a relationship deeper than ever before. The mother attributes this breakthrough entirely to her shift in consciousness from trying to fix external situations to recognizing inner spiritual truth. This pattern reveals something profound about how consciousness operates. When you truly understand the kingdom of heaven as your own consciousness, you stop manipulating outer conditions and start recognizing inner reality. From this recognition, healing, prosperity, harmony, and guidance naturally emerge into your visible experience as material reflection of spiritual truth. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by sharing a specific technique that Joel taught for developing this awareness. He called it the practice of stillness, and it's far more than simply sitting quietly. This is an active inner stance of receptivity, an openness to divine presence that already exists within your consciousness, waiting only for your recognition. The technique itself is remarkably simple. Set aside 15 minutes each morning before external demands consume your attention. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and release all thoughts about problems, needs, or desires. This is crucial. Do not pray for things. Do not visualize outcomes. Simply rest in the awareness. The kingdom of heaven is present within me. Let this recognition fill your consciousness without any effort to make something happen or achieve any particular result. The revelation here is that you don't need to create divine presence through spiritual techniques. You only need to become receptive to what already exists within you. At first, your mind will rebel against this simplicity. It will insist you should be doing something, asking for something, working towards something tangible. This mental restlessness is completely natural and part of the journey. Simply observe these thoughts without engaging them and return gently to your recognition of inner kingdom presence. The mindset shift occurring beneath the surface during these meditation sessions is profound. You're gradually training your consciousness to recognize spiritual reality rather than just reacting to material appearances. This becomes the foundation for transformation in every area of life. If you've experienced moments of profound stillness where something deeper than thought was revealed, write in the comments, "I've touched the stillness." Let's explore another complementary technique that reinforces this awareness throughout your day. The second complementary technique that Joel taught is what he called divine indifference. Now, this term can easily be misunderstood. It doesn't mean becoming uncaring or emotionally detached from life situations. It certainly doesn't mean passive resignation to whatever happens. What it actually describes is a profound inner freedom. You are no longer enslaved to material conditions because you've discovered an inner kingdom that remains perfect regardless of outer appearances. You care deeply about situations and people, but you are not controlled by them because your source is consciousness, not circumstances. This mindset shift creates a radical transformation in how you experience daily challenges. When difficult situations arise, a troubling diagnosis, a financial setback, a relationship conflict, you pause and recognize, the kingdom of heaven within me is untouched by this material appearance. Divine reality exists beyond what my senses report. This recognition doesn't deny the existence of problems or suggest you should ignore practical matters. Rather, it prevents problems from controlling your inner state completely. You remain anchored in spiritual truth, even while addressing material concerns wisely. This is the balance point where spiritual awareness meets practical living. A businessman who learned this technique described his experience in revealing terms. When his largest client suddenly cancelled a major contract, a situation that would normally trigger panic and desperation, he took just 5 minutes alone to recognize the kingdom consciousness within him. From this centered awareness, he then addressed the situation calmly and creatively. Within a week, 3 new opportunities appeared that proved more profitable than the lost contract had been. The revelation wasn't that problems disappeared, but that his response to challenges flowed from a different source entirely. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring perhaps the most transformative application of kingdom consciousness, recognizing it in others. This is profoundly important for healing relationships. When someone treats you unfairly, criticizes you harshly, or seems intent on creating conflict, your natural reaction is to see them as the problem, the obstacle, perhaps even the enemy. But kingdom consciousness reveals a deeper truth. The divine presence exists within their consciousness too, even if they are currently unaware of it and acting from ego or fear instead. This recognition doesn't mean you allow mistreatment or fail to set healthy boundaries. It doesn't mean you pretend harmful behavior is acceptable. It means you respond to situations without seeing others as enemies to defeat or obstacles to overcome. This inner stance often produces surprising results in relationships. People sense at some level when you see them through kingdom consciousness rather than judgment, and something within them responds to this recognition naturally. The hidden truth is that we all hunger for someone to see past our outer behavior to the divine essence within us. A teacher used this approach with a student who had been disruptive and disrespectful for months. Instead of reacting with anger and punishment, she began silently recognizing the kingdom of heaven within this troubled student during her morning meditation. She maintained appropriate classroom discipline while holding this inner recognition consistently. The transformation that unfolded was remarkable. Within weeks, the student's behavior began changing noticeably. If you've ever experienced someone seeing the best in you when you couldn't see it in yourself, write in the comments, "Someone recognized my inner light." Let's address now the realistic challenges you'll encounter as you begin implementing these practices. Let me be honest about the challenges you'll face on this journey, because pretending the path is easy would do you a disservice. The first major obstacle is simply maintaining consistency. You'll likely begin with enthusiasm, meditating daily and recognizing kingdom, a consciousness throughout your day. Then life will inevitably get busy. Deadlines, family demands, health issues will consume your attention completely. You'll skip your practice for a few days, then a week, perhaps even longer. When this happens, guilt and discouragement often follow. You might think you failed, that you're not spiritual enough, that this path is too difficult for someone with your responsibilities. This is the pivotal moment in your journey. Instead of abandoning the practice entirely, simply return to it today without self-judgment. The revelation that transforms spiritual seekers is understanding that growth isn't about perfection, but persistence through imperfection. Joel himself experienced periods where external demands made regular meditation difficult. He didn't interpret this as spiritual failure. He simply returned to practice when possible and maintained awareness even during busy periods. The kingdom of heaven within you doesn't disappear when you forget to recognize it. It waits patiently for your attention to return, like the sun behind clouds waiting to become visible again. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by addressing perhaps the most difficult challenge, dealing with severe crises that seem to contradict kingdom consciousness entirely. When you receive a devastating diagnosis, when financial disaster strikes, or when a relationship falls apart, recognizing inner spiritual perfection can feel not just difficult, but absurd or even offensive. How can you acknowledge kingdom consciousness when material circumstances scream disaster and loss? The breakthrough comes in understanding that Joel isn't asking you to deny painful circumstances or pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't. He's inviting you to hold two truths simultaneously. Material circumstances are real on their level, but spiritual reality is deeper and more fundamental. This dual awareness isn't easy. It requires spiritual maturity to navigate life's storms while maintaining consciousness of the kingdom within. You'll sometimes lose your grip on kingdom consciousness completely during severe challenges. This is human and natural. The practice isn't achieving permanent perfection, but developing the ability to return to spiritual awareness more quickly after being pulled into material fear. Each return strengthens your spiritual foundation until, over time, something remarkable begins to unfold. Kingdom consciousness that once required deliberate effort becomes increasingly natural. You automatically return to spiritual truth more quickly after being temporarily pulled into material thinking. Solutions appear more readily because your awareness is tuned to the infinite intelligence of the inner kingdom. Peace becomes more consistent, not because circumstances are always ideal, but because you're anchored in something deeper than circumstances. Your relationships deepen as you consistently recognize the divine in others. Creativity flows more freely because you're connected to its infinite source. Health improves gradually as consciousness of wholeness permeates your experience. Prosperity increases naturally as you live from the abundance of the kingdom rather than the limitations of material thinking. If you've experienced moments where returning to spiritual awareness feels easier than it once did, write in the comments, "My spiritual muscles are growing." Let's look now at how these principles can be integrated into the fabric of your daily life. As we draw our exploration to a close, I want to acknowledge something important. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey into kingdom consciousness, you're clearly someone who recognizes the profound potential of spiritual truth to transform everyday life. This isn't just philosophical theory for you. You're seeking practical wisdom that can be applied to real challenges and opportunities. I've shared these teachings from Joel Goldsmith because they've deeply impacted my own understanding of the divine presence within. The recognition that the kingdom of heaven exists within your own consciousness right now isn't just another spiritual concept. It's a revelation that can transform every aspect of your experience when applied consistently. If you found value in these insights and want to continue exploring practical, mystical wisdom that bridges the spiritual and material worlds, consider subscribing to this channel. Each week, we dive into transformative teachings that go beyond theory into lived experience, always with the goal of making spiritual truth accessible and applicable to everyday life. If this message about the kingdom of heaven within resonated with your own inner knowing, I'd love to hear from you. Simply comment, "The kingdom is within me," so I know these teachings connected with something already alive in your consciousness. A gentle tap on the like button helps these teachings reach others who might be searching for exactly this understanding right now. People who, like you, sense there's something more profound beneath the surface of material existence. Right here, you'll find another video that explores how to maintain spiritual awareness during times of crisis and challenge. It's a perfect companion to what we've discussed today. Click and join me there as we continue this journey of awakening together. Remember, the kingdom of heaven isn't somewhere else or sometime later. It's within you right now, waiting only for your recognition. Imagine standing in a desert, 40 days without food, your body weakened, your stomach empty. And then, in your most vulnerable moment, a voice whispers, "Why suffer? You have the power. Turn these stones into bread." What would you do? This is not a story about resisting a meal. This is the moment when Jesus revealed the greatest secret about human existence, a secret that, once understood, changes everything about how you experience life itself. My friends, we gather here today not merely to discuss an ancient scripture, but to penetrate the living truth that Jesus demonstrated in that wilderness moment. When he said, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God," something happened in consciousness that reverberates through time into this very moment. Let us be still and contemplate what actually occurred. The nature of true hunger. Jesus had fasted 40 days. The body was making its demands known. And into that physical hunger came temptation in its most reasonable form. "If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread." Notice the subtlety here. The temptation was not to do something obviously wrong. It was to use spiritual power for material satisfaction. It was to let physical need determine spiritual action. It was to live from the outside in, rather than from the inside out. And what happened when Jesus refused? He didn't simply resist bread. He revealed a principle of existence that most of humanity has yet to discover. There is a hunger in you that bread can never satisfy. There is a substance that feeds consciousness itself. There is a life that transcends the biological organism. When you live by bread alone, and by bread, we mean all material things, all external circumstances, all physical conditions. You place yourself at the mercy of an ever-changing world. You become a beggar, forever dependent on what comes from outside yourself. Your peace depends on your bank account. Your joy depends on other people's opinions. Your security depends on circumstances you cannot control. This is not living. This is mere survival. The word is substance, but Jesus spoke of something else, every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. What is this word? Is it sentences in a book? Is it commandments on stone tablets? No, my friends. The word is the creative principle of the universe expressing itself. It is the divine idea. It is truth revealing itself in consciousness. It is the still small voice that speaks in silence. It is the presence of infinite intelligence and love at the center of your being. When Jesus said we live by this word, he meant that consciousness fed by spiritual realization is self-sustaining. It has its own supply. It has its own source. It is not dependent on external conditions because it draws from an infinite wellspring within. This is why the mystics of all ages have known periods of illumination where they needed neither food nor sleep, where they felt sustained by something beyond the physical. They were living by that word. They were drawing on a substance that the material senses cannot measure, but that consciousness knows as more real than bread. The great discovery. What happened when Jesus made this declaration? He discovered, or rather, he demonstrated that you are not merely a body requiring feeding. You are consciousness itself, and consciousness requires truth the way a body requires food. Think of your own experience. Have you not known moments when an idea illuminated your mind and you felt more nourished than by any meal? Have you not experienced times when understanding dawned and strength returned to you, though nothing in your external circumstances had changed? Have you not felt the presence of love or beauty or truth and known yourself to be more alive than when surrounded by material abundance? This is living by the word. This is drawing on inner resources. This is the self-sufficiency of spirit, the practical application. Now, someone might say, this is beautiful mysticism, but I still need to eat. I still have bills to pay. I still live in a material world. Yes, and so did Jesus. He didn't stop eating after the temptation. He didn't tell his disciples to abandon their nets and starve. He lived in the world, used material things, broke bread with his followers. But, and here is the crucial point, he was not dependent on them. He was not enslaved by them. He did not live by them alone. His consciousness was anchored in something deeper, something that no circumstance could touch. And because of this inner anchoring, something miraculous happened in his outer experience. Provision appeared. Needs were met. The material world responded to his consciousness of spiritual abundance. 5 loaves fed 5,000 because one consciousness knew that supply is infinite. This is the great secret when you stop living by bread alone and begin to live by the word, by truth, by spiritual consciousness, by awareness of the infinite presence within you. Your relationship to the material world transforms. You use it, but it doesn't use you. You enjoy it, but you're not dependent on it. You work with it, but your life doesn't rise or fall with it. Your wilderness moment, each of you faces your own wilderness temptation. It comes in different forms, but the essence is the same. Will you live by bread alone, or will you discover the word that sustains consciousness? Perhaps your wilderness is financial difficulty, and the temptation is to compromise your integrity to obtain security. Perhaps it's loneliness, and the temptation is to accept relationships that diminish rather than enhance your soul. Perhaps it's fear of scarcity, and the temptation is to hoard, grasp, manipulate, control. In each case, you are being asked the same question Jesus faced: what is your source? What sustains you? What is the foundation of your existence? When you answer, bread alone, when you say that your life depends entirely on external circumstances, you condemn yourself to perpetual anxiety. The bread can always be taken away. The circumstances can always change. The material supply can always fail. But when you answer the word, when you discover that there is a consciousness within you fed by truth, by love, by infinite intelligence, you find an unshakable foundation. You discover a supply that cannot be depleted. You know a presence that circumstances cannot touch. The transformation of experience. What happened when Jesus said these words was not merely that he resisted temptation. A revelation occurred, a principle was demonstrated, a way of living was illuminated, and every person who has truly understood this teaching has experienced the same transformation. They have stopped being victims of circumstance and become expressions of consciousness. They have stopped begging from the world and started drawing from the infinite. They have stopped living in fear and started living in faith, not faith that things will work out, but faith that there is a presence and power within them greater than any circumstance they will ever face. This doesn't mean you stop eating bread. It means you stop worshipping it. It means you stop giving it power over your peace. It means you stop believing that your life consists of the abundance of things you possess. Instead, you begin each day knowing that you are sustained by something invisible, nourished by something intangible, supported by something infinite. You go about your human activities, but you do so from a consciousness of sufficiency rather than lack, abundance rather than limitation, wholeness rather than need. The invitation, my friends, the invitation before you today is the same one Jesus faced in the wilderness. Will you discover what truly sustains life? Not just biological life that continues automatically for a time regardless of your consciousness, but real life, abundant life, the life that is lived from the inside out, the life that knows itself as more than a temporary organism dependent on external supply, the life that is conscious of its source in the infinite. This discovery doesn't come through intellectual understanding alone, though understanding helps. It comes through practice. It comes through turning within daily and touching that place where the word is spoken. It comes through meditation, contemplation, the cultivation of inner stillness where you hear what cannot be heard with ears and know what cannot be known with the material senses. It comes through those moments when, instead of immediately reacting to circumstance, you pause and remember, I shall not live by this circumstance alone. I shall live by the truth that is speaking in my consciousness. I shall live by the word. What happened when Jesus said, "Man shall not live by bread alone"? The universe revealed its secret. You are more than you appear to be. You have access to infinite resources. You are sustained by something that circumstances cannot touch. You are consciousness itself. And consciousness fed by truth is self-sufficient. This is not just an ancient teaching. This is a present possibility. This is available to you now, in this moment, as you contemplate these words. Will you live by bread alone, always dependent, always anxious, always at the mercy of change? Or will you live by the word, discovering in your own consciousness that there is a presence, a power, a principle that is with you always, sustaining you, guiding you, making all things new? The wilderness awaits your answer. The stones are before you, and the word is speaking in the silence of your own heart. Let those who have ears to hear, hear. The temptation reveals true hunger. Jesus' response to Satan in the wilderness demonstrates that physical sustenance alone leaves the soul empty. Humanity's deepest hunger is spiritual. The word as living substance. Every word that proceeds from the mouth of God is not mere philosophy, but actual spiritual nourishment that sustains consciousness at a level bread cannot reach. Material dependency versus spiritual self-sufficiency. When we live by bread alone, we become slaves to circumstances. When we live by spirit, we find an inner supply that external conditions cannot diminish. The testing of consciousness, the wilderness experience, symbolizes those moments when material resources fail us, forcing us to discover whether we have cultivated an inner life or merely an outer existence. Transcendence through realization. Jesus didn't deny the body's need for bread. He revealed that consciousness fed by truth transforms even our material experience, making us whole rather than merely full. The temptation reveals true hunger. In that wilderness moment, 40 days into his fast, Jesus faced something far more profound than physical hunger. The temptation that came to him was not merely about bread. It was about the fundamental question of human existence. What truly sustains life? Satan's suggestion to turn stones into bread appeared reasonable, even compassionate. After all, the body was hungry. The stones were there, the power was available. Why not satisfy a legitimate need? But Jesus saw through the appearance to the principle underneath. He recognized that to live by bread alone, to make physical satisfaction the goal and measure of life, was to reduce human existence to mere biological survival. It was to place consciousness at the mercy of circumstances, to make happiness dependent on external conditions, to establish a pattern of living from the outside in rather than from the inside out. The deeper hunger Jesus identified was the hunger of consciousness itself. Every human being experiences this, though most cannot name it. It's the restlessness that remains even when the stomach is full. It's the emptiness that persists despite material abundance. It's the longing that no possession can satisfy, no achievement can fulfill, no relationship can completely fill. This is the soul's hunger for its source, consciousness seeking conscious contact with the infinite, the spirit within yearning for recognition and realization. When Jesus refused to turn stones into bread, he was not denying the body's legitimate needs. He was establishing a hierarchy of values, a recognition that man is more than flesh, life is more than metabolism, and existence is more than a series of physical satisfactions. He was declaring that there exists a substance, a nourishment, a reality that feeds something deeper than the stomach. It feeds consciousness itself, and when consciousness is truly fed, everything else falls into proper place and proportion. This temptation reveals to us our own condition. How often do we seek to satisfy spiritual hunger with material bread? How often do we try to fill the emptiness within with things from without? How often do we mistake the symptom for the disease, seeking more possessions, more experiences, more stimulation, when what we truly hunger for is meaning, purpose, connection with something infinite and eternal? The Word as living substance. When Jesus spoke of every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God, he was not referring to sentences in Scripture or commandments written on tablets. He was pointing to something far more dynamic and immediate, the creative principle of the universe expressing itself in consciousness. This word is not something you read, it is something you experience. It is not information, it is illumination. It is not concept, it is contact with reality itself. In the mystical understanding that Joel Goldsmith taught, the Word is the divine idea making itself known in individual consciousness. It is truth revealing itself. It is the infinite intelligence communicating its nature to the receptive soul. It is that moment of inner knowing when something clicks into place, when light dawns in the mind, when you suddenly see what you couldn't see before, understand what was previously mysterious, and know what no one had to teach you. This word is living substance. It actually nourishes consciousness the way bread nourishes the body. When a truth is realized, not merely believed or accepted intellectually, but actually realized in consciousness, something happens. Strength returns, peace descends, clarity emerges. The person who was confused finds direction. The person who was weak discovers inner fortitude. The person who is anxious knows sudden calm. This is not psychological, it is ontological. Something real has happened at the level of being itself. The mystics of all traditions have known this. They speak of being fed by silence, sustained by meditation, nourished by the presence of God. They describe periods of illumination when physical needs seemed to fade in importance, when they felt held and sustained by something that had nothing to do with material circumstances. They weren't hallucinating or deluded. They were experiencing what Jesus described, life sustained by the Word. This word proceeds continually from the mouth of God, which is to say, from infinite intelligence, from the creative source, from the divine principle that underlies all existence. It is always speaking, always available, always offering itself to consciousness. But it must be heard, it must be received, it must be recognized. This requires a different kind of attention than we normally employ. It requires interior listening, the cultivation of inner stillness, the practice of contemplation. When you begin to live by this word, you discover that you have access to a supply that circumstances cannot interrupt, a resource that the world did not give and therefore cannot take away, a foundation that remains stable regardless of external turbulence. This is not theory. This is demonstrable experience available to anyone willing to turn within and cultivate the consciousness that hears and receives the word. Material dependency versus spiritual self-sufficiency, the fundamental choice that Jesus presented in the wilderness is the same choice every human being faces daily. Will you live in dependency on external circumstances, or will you discover the self-sufficiency of spirit? This is not about whether you use material things. Of course you will. It is about whether material things use you. It is about where your consciousness is anchored, what your sense of security rests upon, what you believe ultimately sustains and maintains your existence. When consciousness lives by bread alone, it establishes a pattern of perpetual dependency. Your peace depends on your bank balance. Your joy depends on other people's behavior. Your security depends on circumstances you cannot fully control. Your sense of worth depends on achievements that can be lost. Your confidence depends on conditions that constantly change. This is not freedom. This is bondage. You have made yourself a prisoner of circumstance, a slave to externals, a victim of whatever changes the world brings. Consider how this plays out in daily experience. The person living by bread alone constantly checks external conditions to determine their internal state. Good news arrives, and they feel temporarily elated. Bad news comes, and they sink into anxiety. A compliment lifts them up. Criticism casts them down. Financial gain brings relief. Financial loss brings fear. Their entire emotional and spiritual life is at the mercy of an ever-changing world over which they have limited control. But spiritual self-sufficiency offers something entirely different. This does not mean isolation from the world or independence in the sense of needing nothing. It means discovering that at the core of your being there exists a source, a presence, a reality that external circumstances cannot touch. It means finding that there is something in you that remains when everything else is stripped away. It means knowing yourself as consciousness anchored in the infinite rather than as a body dependent on the finite. Jesus demonstrated this self-sufficiency throughout his ministry. He moved through favorable and unfavorable circumstances with equal poise. He was not elated by success nor devastated by opposition. He spoke with authority that came from within rather than from external validation. He possessed an inner calm that circumstances could not disturb. He had access to a supply that didn't depend on human goodwill or material resources. This wasn't because he was divine and you are not. It was because he had discovered what is true for all consciousness. The infinite is your source. When you begin to live from this realization, a profound shift occurs. You still engage with the material world, but you're no longer enslaved by it. You still work, plan, and use practical wisdom, but your fundamental sense of security rests on something deeper. You discover that there is a presence within you that can sustain you through any circumstance, guide you through any difficulty, and maintain you regardless of external conditions. This is not belief. This is the actual discovery of spiritual self-sufficiency, the testing of consciousness. The wilderness experience that Jesus endured is not merely a historical event that happened to one man 2,000 years ago. It is a universal pattern, a recurring theme in the spiritual development of every soul. The wilderness represents those moments when our material resources fail us, when our usual supports are removed, when we can no longer rely on external circumstances to sustain us. These are the moments that test whether we have cultivated an inner life or merely maintained an outer existence. Every person encounters their wilderness. It may come as financial crisis, when the resources you counted on disappear. It may come as health crisis, when the body you took for granted fails you. It may come as relational crisis, when the people you depended upon leave or betray you. It may come as existential crisis, when the meanings you lived by suddenly seem empty and the purposes you pursued seem meaningless. In each case, the same question arises: what sustains you when the bread fails? This testing is not punishment, it is opportunity. It is the universe's way of forcing us to discover whether we have anything more than bread to live by. When everything is going well, when circumstances are favorable, when resources are abundant, it's easy to believe we are spiritual. But the wilderness reveals what we actually rely upon. It strips away the superficial and shows us the foundation we've built upon. Have we built on rock or on sand? Have we cultivated inner resources or merely accumulated outer ones? The temptation in the wilderness always appears reasonable. Turn the stones to bread. Why not? Use your power to make yourself comfortable. Employ your abilities to escape the difficulty. Compromise your principles just this once to get through the crisis. The temptation is to abandon the inner work in favor of immediate outer relief, to trade spiritual development for material comfort, to live by bread alone because bread at least addresses the pressing need. But those who succumb to this temptation miss the very thing the wilderness was designed to reveal: the presence of a sustaining power within consciousness itself. They return to dependency on externals, having learned nothing from their crisis. They rebuild the same structure that collapsed, reinvest in the same securities that failed them, re-establish the same patterns that led to emptiness. Those who, like Jesus, refuse to live by bread alone, discover something extraordinary in the wilderness. They find that when material resources fail, spiritual resources emerge. They discover capacities they didn't know they had, wisdom they didn't realize they possessed, strength that comes from somewhere beyond the physical. They learn that consciousness sustained by truth can endure what the body alone cannot. They realize that there is indeed a word that proceeds from the mouth of God, and this word is sufficient for every need. My friends, we have journeyed together through the wilderness of consciousness, exploring what happened when Jesus said those transformative words: "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." Now we must ask ourselves the question that matters most: what will happen when you say these words? Not merely with your lips, but with your life. not as quotation, but as realization. The choice before you is clear and immediate. It is not a choice you make once and forget. It is the choice you make in every moment of decision, in every circumstance of challenge, in every temptation to believe that your life depends entirely on what you can see, touch, and possess. Will you live by bread alone? Will you place your trust in the bank account that can be depleted, the job that can be lost, the relationships that can change, the body that will inevitably age? Will you anchor your consciousness in that which is temporary, changeable, uncertain? Will you remain a prisoner of circumstance, forever dependent on conditions beyond your control, perpetually anxious about what tomorrow might bring? Or will you discover what Jesus discovered in that wilderness, that there is a word, a presence, a power within you that no circumstance can touch, that consciousness fed by truth is self-sustaining, that you have access to infinite resources, that the source of your life is not outside you in the material world, but inside you in the realm of spirit? Go now into your life. Let the word feed your consciousness. Refuse to live by bread alone, and watch what happens not just in your circumstances, but in your very being, as you discover the truth that Jesus lived. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. This is not his truth alone. This is your truth. This is the truth of all consciousness. This is the secret of life itself. May you have the courage to live it. May you have the patience to practice it. May you have the faith to trust it. And may you discover, as countless others have discovered, that when you live by the word, everything, even your daily bread, becomes an expression of infinite abundance and unconditional love. The wilderness has spoken. The word has been given. The choice is yours. Let us close our eyes for a moment of silent recognition. In this silence, may you hear the word that is always speaking. May you know the presence that is always sustaining. May you realize the truth that is always true. You are more than bread. You are consciousness itself, eternally fed by the infinite source from which all life flows. Go in peace, live by the word, and be free.
For 2,000 years, humanity has missed the most revolutionary truth ever spoken. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Not Christ for you, not Christ above you, but Christ in you. This single realization changes everything about healing, abundance, and the nature of your identity. Most seekers spend lifetimes looking outward for what already dwells within their own consciousness. Joel Goldsmith discovered that this indwelling Christ is not a religious concept, but a living presence of divine consciousness that constitutes your true self. When you grasp this mystery, you stop begging an external God for help and begin recognizing the infinite power already established at the center of your being. This is not blasphemy, but the deepest truth of mystical Christianity. The moment you understand Christ in you as your actual identity, not as something you must achieve or become worthy of, the entire spiritual search collapses into recognition. You are not trying to reach God. You are awakening to the God presence that has been your reality since before time began. This is the secret that transforms everything. Traditional religion taught you to pray to a distant deity, begging for intervention in your problems. Joel Goldsmith revealed this approach keeps you in spiritual infancy, forever dependent on something outside yourself. The mystery of Christ in you means divine power is not in heaven waiting to descend, but already established as the essence of your consciousness right now. When you truly comprehend this indwelling presence, prayer transforms from petition to recognition. You are not asking God to do something, you are acknowledging what already is. The Christ within you is not dormant, waiting to be activated. It is the living reality of your being, expressing as the intelligence that beats your heart and breathes your breath without your conscious effort. This understanding dissolves the separation between human and divine that has plagued religion for centuries. You are not a sinner seeking redemption from an angry God. You are divine consciousness itself, temporarily forgetting its true nature. The journey is not from human to divine, but from ignorance to recognition of what you have always been. Joel Goldsmith taught a specific practice to realize this indwelling Christ. Sit quietly and turn your attention inward, not seeking anything but simply becoming aware of the awareness itself. Ask yourself, what is aware of my thoughts right now? What is conscious of this moment? That witnessing presence is Christ in you, the eternal observer that never changes regardless of circumstances. This practice requires patience because the mind immediately wants to make it complicated or turn it into another doing. But Christ consciousness is not achieved through effort. It is revealed through stillness and the withdrawal of attention from the outer world of effects. When you rest in this inner awareness regularly, even for 5 minutes daily, something begins to shift in your perception of reality. Most people experience this shift gradually over weeks or months. You notice less reactive behavior, greater peace amid chaos, and circumstances that once disturbed you lose their power. This is not positive thinking, but the natural result of identifying with the changeless Christ within, rather than the changing human conditions without. Your center of gravity moves from effect to cause. The practical power of this realization becomes evident in daily challenges. When facing illness, financial lack, or broken relationships, the typical human response is panic and frantic problem-solving. But when you understand Christ in you, you pause and recognize that the divine presence within you is untouched by these appearances. The problem exists in the world of effect, not in consciousness itself. Joel emphasized that this is not denial of problems, but recognition of a deeper reality. You acknowledge the appearance while simultaneously knowing that Christ consciousness contains no disease, no lack, no discord. As you rest in this awareness, solutions emerge that the anxious human mind could never conceive. Healing happens not through struggle, but through the natural expression of wholeness that is your true identity. This understanding requires spiritual maturity to grasp fully. You are not pretending problems do not exist. You are seeing them from the standpoint of consciousness rather than from the standpoint of struggling humanity. From this elevated perspective, what seemed insurmountable often dissolves or transforms in unexpected ways. This is mystical Christianity in action. Sarah spent 15 years in traditional church, faithfully attending services and praying for her chronic anxiety to be healed. Despite her devotion, the panic attacks intensified until she could barely leave her home. Everything changed when she encountered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on Christ in You during a desperate online search one sleepless night at 3 a.m. She began the practice of turning within to recognize the divine presence as her actual identity. The first 2 weeks brought no relief, and she nearly abandoned the approach. But something shifted in week 3. During a panic attack, instead of fighting the sensations, she remembered Christ in You and became aware of the awareness witnessing the panic. The attack did not stop immediately, but she experienced herself as larger than the symptoms for the first time. Over the following 3 months, Sarah practiced this recognition multiple times daily. The panic attacks gradually decreased in frequency and intensity. More importantly, her relationship with them changed completely. She no longer identified as an anxious person trying to become peaceful. She recognized herself as the peace of Christ consciousness, temporarily experiencing anxiety as a passing wave. This shift in identity transformed her life more than any medication or therapy ever had. Michael faced bankruptcy after his business collapsed during an economic downturn. For 6 months, he prayed desperately for God to send money, clients, or any kind of rescue. Nothing came. Exhausted and bitter, he stumbled across Joel Goldsmith's writings about the Christ within as the source of infinite supply. Initially, he dismissed it as impractical mysticism when he needed concrete solutions immediately, but desperation made him willing to try anything. He began meditating on the principle that Christ consciousness lacks nothing and expresses as abundance. For 4 weeks, his financial situation continued deteriorating while he practiced recognizing divine completeness within. Then an unexpected call came from a former colleague who needed exactly Michael's expertise for a consulting project he never knew existed. That single project led to 3 more within 2 months. Michael's income not only recovered but exceeded his previous business earnings within 6 months. More significantly, his entire relationship with money transformed. He no longer experienced the anxiety of depending on external circumstances because he had touched the inner source of supply that never runs dry. This was not magic, but the natural expression of consciousness that knows itself as complete. Jennifer's marriage crumbled after 23 years when her husband announced he no longer loved her. The devastation sent her into deep sadness and obsessive prayers for God to change his heart. For 8 months she begged, bargained, and pleaded with no results. A friend recommended Joel Goldsmith's teachings, which she initially resisted because she wanted her husband back, not spiritual philosophy during her crisis. She finally began the practice of recognizing Christ in you during her darkest moment of despair. At first it felt like empty words while her heart was breaking, but she persisted, turning within multiple times daily to acknowledge the divine presence that remained untouched by her circumstances. Gradually, over several weeks, she noticed moments of unexpected peace breaking through the grief like sunlight through storm clouds. After 3 months of consistent practice, something profound shifted. She realized she had been seeking completion in her husband rather than recognizing the wholeness already present in consciousness. The marriage did not restore, but she discovered an inner fulfillment that no relationship could give or take away. A year later, she understood that losing the marriage led her to find her true self, which was the greater gift all along. This is the mystery of Christ in you transforming devastation into liberation. These transformation stories share a common thread that Joel Goldsmith emphasized repeatedly. None of these individuals experienced instant miracles. Each practiced recognition of the indwelling Christ consistently over weeks and months, often while circumstances appeared unchanged or even worsened. The turning point came not when God finally answered their prayers, but when they shifted identity from struggling human to consciousness itself. This is the radical difference between religious prayer and mystical realization. Religious prayer assumes you are separate from God and must convince the deity to intervene. Mystical realization recognizes you are the very consciousness of God individualized, and your recognition of this truth allows it to express naturally through your experience. The power was never absent, only recognition was missing. If these transformation stories inspire you to discover the Christ within your own consciousness, like this video to help others find Joel Goldsmith's revolutionary teachings, subscribe for more mystical Christianity wisdom that actually transforms lives, and comment with which story resonated most deeply with your current spiritual journey. Your engagement helps spread this liberating truth. Beyond the foundational practice of recognizing Christ in you, Joel Goldsmith taught complementary techniques that deepen realization. The first is what he called resting in the Word. When a problem appears demanding attention, instead of mentally wrestling with solutions, you rest in a spiritual truth such as Christ in me is my sufficiency. You do not repeat it mechanically, but let consciousness itself reveal the depth of meaning within those words. This is not affirmation or positive thinking. Affirmations assume something is wrong that needs fixing. Resting in truth assumes everything is already complete in consciousness, and you are allowing that completeness to reveal itself. You might spend 5 to 15 minutes simply being with one statement, letting it unfold its implications in your awareness without mental effort or strain. Many students report that during this practice, insights arise spontaneously that completely reframe their understanding of the situation. A problem that seemed insurmountable suddenly appears from a new angle where a solution becomes obvious. This is not your human mind figuring things out, but Christ consciousness revealing itself through your awareness. The practice creates space for divine intelligence to emerge naturally. Another powerful technique Joel taught is listening for the still small voice. After acknowledging Christ in you, sit in receptive silence with the inner question, what is the truth about this situation? Do not try to answer with your thinking mind. Simply listen in the silence as you would listen for a distant sound. Most of the time, no words come, just deepening peace. Occasionally, a knowing arises that is distinct from your usual mental chatter. It comes as gentle certainty rather than anxious thought. It might be a simple instruction, a Bible verse, or just a felt sense of what to do next. Joel emphasized that this inner voice never brings condemnation, fear, or urgency. Those signals indicate ego speaking, not Christ consciousness. The true inner voice brings peace even when it challenges your preferences or plans. Developing this listening capacity requires consistent practice over months, because you must learn to distinguish the authentic inner voice from the many imitations the mind produces. Start with 5 minutes of listening silence daily. Over time, You develop a sensitivity to the quality of Christ consciousness that cannot be counterfeited. This becomes your reliable inner guidance for all decisions, far surpassing human reasoning alone. Joel Goldsmith also taught a practice he called living by grace. Throughout your day, pause periodically to remember Christ in you as the source of your activity. Before important meetings, difficult conversations, or challenging tasks, take 30 seconds to silently acknowledge the divine presence as the intelligence acting through you. This is not asking for help, but recognizing what is already true about your being in every moment. Many students discover this transforms their effectiveness dramatically. When you remember you are not acting from limited human capacity but from infinite consciousness, anxiety about outcomes dissolves. You bring full presence to each moment rather than mentally rehearsing what you will say or worrying about results. This allows creativity and wisdom to flow through you naturally rather than being blocked by self-consciousness and fear. The practice seems simple, almost too simple to be effective. But Joel insisted that the most profound truths are always simple, though not easy to live consistently. The challenge is not complexity, but remembering to recognize Christ in you amidst the demands of daily life. Students who practice these periodic pauses throughout their day report feeling carried by a power beyond themselves rather than struggling through life alone. A final complementary practice involves what Joel called impersonalization. When someone seems to be creating problems in your life, the human tendency is to blame them, resent them, or try to change them. But when you understand Christ in you, you also recognize Christ in them, even when their behavior appears anything but divine. This does not mean accepting harmful behavior, but seeing through the appearance to the truth. Silently acknowledge to yourself that this person is also Christ consciousness, expressing, even if they have forgotten it completely. Their troublesome behavior comes from that forgetfulness, not from their true nature. As you hold this recognition in consciousness without telling them, something often shifts in the relationship. They may become less antagonistic, or circumstances may change so you no longer must interact, or you develop compassion that transforms the dynamic entirely. This practice requires spiritual maturity because it goes against every human instinct for justice and vindication. But Joel taught that you cannot experience the Christ in you while denying it in others. The recognition must be universal, or it remains merely intellectual concept rather than living realization. As this recognition deepens, you discover that there truly is only one consciousness appearing as many, and separation was always the illusion. Even with consistent practice, students encounter predictable obstacles that can derail realization if not understood. The first challenge appears in the initial weeks when nothing seems to happen. You faithfully practice recognizing Christ in you, but problems persist, and peace remains elusive. The temptation becomes strong to conclude the teaching does not work, or you are doing it wrong. Most seekers abandon the practice at this critical stage. Joel warned that consciousness does not respond to human timelines. Your dedication to recognizing truth is like planting a seed. You cannot dig it up every day to check for growth without destroying the process. The seed germinates in darkness, invisible to the surface observer. Your consistent recognition is germinating in consciousness, preparing to emerge as visible transformation, but you must trust the process even when you see no evidence yet. He recommended continuing the practice for at least 3 months before evaluating results. Not because God needs time to answer, but because your consciousness needs time to accept a truth that contradicts everything your human experience has taught. This is reprogramming at the deepest level, and it happens gradually for most people, not instantly. The few who experience immediate transformation are exceptions, not the standard to measure yourself against. Another common obstacle emerges when initial transformation occurs, but then seems to reverse. You experienced weeks of peace and improved circumstances, then suddenly old problems resurface with intensity. This feels like failure or loss of connection with Christ consciousness. In reality, Joel explained, this is consciousness testing the depth of your realization. Have you truly recognized Christ in you as your permanent identity, or was it just a temporary feel-good experience? These apparent setbacks actually serve your spiritual growth by revealing where you are still identified with human conditions rather than divine consciousness. When the peace you felt disappears, you discover whether you were resting in truth itself or merely enjoying a pleasant emotional state. This distinction is crucial. Emotional states come and go. Recognition of Christ consciousness remains constant beneath all changing conditions. The breakthrough comes when you continue recognizing truth even while experiencing difficulty. You acknowledge the problem while simultaneously knowing that Christ in you remains untouched by it. This dual awareness, seeing both the appearance and the reality, is spiritual maturity. Over time, circumstances improve not because you maintained the right feeling, but because your identity shifted from the level of effect to the level of cause where Christ consciousness operates. A third major obstacle occurs when doubt arises about whether this indwelling Christ is real or just comforting imagination. Your rational mind, trained by material education and secular culture, questions whether consciousness is truly divine or merely brain chemistry. This intellectual doubt can undermine your practice unless addressed directly with Joel's teaching about demonstration rather than belief. He emphasized that you do not need to believe in Christ consciousness for it to be true. The sun does not require your belief to shine. Your task is not manufacturing faith, but testing the principle through experience. Practice the recognition consistently and observe what happens in your life over months. Results become your evidence, not theological arguments or other people's testimonies alone. Many students discover that doubt itself becomes less relevant as demonstration increases. When you experience healing, supply, guidance, or peace that cannot be explained by human effort alone, intellectual questions fade into background noise. You may never fully understand how Christ consciousness operates, but you know it does through direct experience. This experiential knowing surpasses belief and dissolves doubt more effectively than any logical argument could achieve. The final major obstacle appears when you experience genuine transformation but then attempt to use Christ consciousness as a technique to manipulate outcomes. You healed once, so you try forcing the same result in another situation. You supplied a need, so you demand supply on your timeline for current desires. This subtle shift from recognition to manipulation sabotages the entire process and returns you to struggle. Joel was adamant that Christ in you is recognized, never used. The moment you try to use spiritual truth to get what you want, you have reverted to the very separation consciousness the teaching is meant to dissolve. You cannot use God because you are not separate from God. You can only recognize and allow the divine nature to express itself naturally, which may look different than your human preferences would dictate. If these insights about overcoming obstacles speak to your spiritual journey, and you are ready to move beyond common pitfalls that stop most seekers, like this video to support content that tells the truth about the challenges of realization, subscribe for advanced teachings that take you deeper into mystical consciousness, and comment with which obstacle you recognize in your own practice right now. Honesty accelerates breakthrough. As your realization of Christ in you deepens through consistent practice over months and years, you begin noticing shifts in how you navigate complex life situations. David, a corporate executive, faced an ethical dilemma when his company pressured him to approve financial reporting that bordered on fraudulent. His career and family security depended on compliance, yet his conscience rebelled against the deception, creating impossible tension. Instead of anxiously weighing options or seeking advice from multiple sources, David turned within to recognize Christ consciousness as his true employer and source of supply. He spent 20 minutes in silence, acknowledging that divine intelligence within him already knew the right action and would provide whatever he genuinely needed. No dramatic voice or vision came, just deepening peace and clarity that he must refuse regardless of consequences. He declined to approve the report and prepared for termination. Instead, within 3 days, the board launched an investigation that exposed the scheme and removed the executives who initiated it. David received a promotion for his integrity. More importantly, he learned that when you trust Christ consciousness within you rather than manipulating circumstances from fear, life reorganizes itself around truth in ways the human mind cannot orchestrate. This is advanced application of the principle. Teresa faced a different challenge when her adult daughter became addicted to opioids and refused all help. For 2 years, Teresa cycled through enabling tough love, desperation, and grief while her daughter deteriorated. Every approach failed. prayer seemed to bounce off the ceiling. The situation appeared hopeless until Teresa finally understood that her anxious prayers were coming from the belief that her daughter was separate from Christ consciousness and needed fixing. She began a new practice based on Joel's teaching. Instead of praying for her daughter to change, she spent time daily recognizing that Christ in you is as true for her daughter as for herself. The divine presence constitutes her daughter's reality, regardless of current appearances. Teresa could not see or feel this truth in her daughter's behavior, but she held the recognition in consciousness like a beacon, without demands for specific timing or outcomes. For 4 months, nothing visible changed while Teresa continued this practice through doubt, discouragement, and heartbreak. Then her daughter called from a hospital where an overdose nearly killed her, suddenly willing to enter treatment. 2 years later, the daughter maintains recovery and credits an inexplicable moment of clarity as the turning point. Teresa knows that Christ consciousness working through recognition in one individual can touch another when human methods fail completely. This is the mystery of oneness. Robert, a physician, integrated Christ consciousness into his medical practice after years of feeling like a fraud who treated symptoms without addressing real causes. He began each day recognizing the divine presence as the true healer, with himself as merely the instrument through which healing emerges. Before seeing each patient, he paused to acknowledge Christ in you for both himself and the person he would treat, regardless of their beliefs. This practice transformed his effectiveness in ways he could not explain medically. Patients who seemed treatment-resistant suddenly responded. Diagnoses came with unusual clarity. He found himself asking questions or ordering tests his training did not suggest, which then revealed hidden issues. Colleagues noticed his patient outcomes improved significantly, though his techniques remained conventional medicine. The difference was consciousness, not methodology. Robert learned that Christ in you does not replace practical action, but infuses it with divine intelligence that surpasses human knowledge. He still used all his medical training, but now as an instrument of consciousness, rather than relying solely on intellectual understanding. This integration of mystical realization with practical responsibility is the mature expression Joel Goldsmith taught. You do not abandon the human while recognizing the divine. You let the divine express through the human naturally. These advanced cases reveal a crucial principle. Christ consciousness does not remove you from the world into spiritual bypassing. It enables you to function in the world with wisdom, power, and love that transcend ordinary human capacity. You still face situations requiring decisions, action, and courage, but you face them from the standpoint of your true identity rather than from fear, lack, or separation. Joel emphasized that mystical realization is not escape from responsibility, but fulfillment of it at a higher level. You bring the consciousness of the infinite into finite situations, which transforms them from within rather than through external manipulation. This is living by grace rather than by human struggle. The circumstances of your life become the very place where Christ consciousness demonstrates itself, not an obstacle to spiritual attainment. The integration typically takes several years of consistent practice before it becomes natural, rather than something you must remember to do. But those who persist discover they are living from a source within themselves that never runs dry, never panics, and never abandons them regardless of what appears in their external world. This is the promise of Christ in you fulfilled through realization, not as theological concept, but as living experience that changes everything. When you truly understand and live from the mystery of Christ in you, your entire relationship with existence transforms permanently. Problems do not disappear, but you see them from the standpoint of consciousness rather than from the standpoint of struggling humanity. This shift in viewpoint changes everything, even when nothing externally changes immediately. You know yourself as the awareness in which problems appear rather than as a victim of problems. This recognition brings a quality of peace that others notice even when they cannot identify what changed about you. You move through challenges that would have devastated your former identity with a centeredness that seems incomprehensible to those still identified with human conditions alone. You are not superhuman or beyond emotion. You simply know your true nature, and that knowing provides an anchor that holds regardless of storms on the surface. Joel taught that this is the consciousness Jesus demonstrated and invited everyone to share. Christ in you was never meant to be Jesus' exclusive possession, but the truth about every person who walks the earth. The mystery was hidden, not because God kept secrets, but because humanity looked everywhere except within their own consciousness. Now you have found what you were seeking, not in heaven above or in practices and rituals, but in the very center of your own being. From this realization flows spontaneous qualities that used to require effort. Love emerges naturally when you recognize the same divine presence in others that you know in yourself. You cannot hate or harm the Christ consciousness you see expressing everywhere, even imperfectly. Compassion arises not as moral obligation, but as recognition of the one life appearing as many, all of it seeking to awaken to itself through diverse experiences and apparent mistakes. Forgiveness becomes effortless when you understand that those who harmed you were acting from forgetfulness of their true nature, not from their divine reality. You need not condone harmful behavior to recognize the Christ in perpetrators as well as victims. This recognition frees you from carrying resentment that only poisons your own consciousness. You release others not for their sake, but for yours, because you cannot experience inner peace while maintaining mental prisons. Gratitude flows continuously when you recognize that Christ consciousness is the source of every good thing in your life. You are no longer dependent on people, circumstances, or your own abilities for well-being. All of that comes from the infinite within you, expressing as exactly what you need, when you need it, often in ways you would never have arranged yourself. This recognition transforms your entire experience of life from anxious grasping to receptive allowing. The practical implications of living from Christ consciousness extend into every area of existence. In relationships, you no longer desperately seek completion in another person because you have found wholeness within yourself. This allows you to love freely rather than from need. In work, you recognize divine intelligence as the source of your creativity and effectiveness, which eliminates anxiety about competition or performance. You do your best and trust consciousness to provide what you require. Regarding health, you see the body as the expression of consciousness rather than a material object subject to inevitable decay. This does not mean denying physical symptoms, but recognizing a deeper reality that can overrule material conditions when consciousness awakens to itself. Many students experience healing of chronic conditions, not through treating the body, but through deepening recognition of their true nature as consciousness itself. With finances, the understanding that Christ in you is infinite supply dissolves the belief in lack that creates financial struggle for most people. You recognize that money and resources are effects of consciousness, not causes. As your consciousness awakens to its own completeness, the effects follow naturally. This is not magic or metaphysical manipulation, but the natural order of existence that most people reverse by looking to effects to supply their needs instead of looking to cause. You stand now at the threshold of a completely new life, though it may not look different externally yet. You have discovered the supreme secret that every mystic throughout history found and tried to communicate. Christ in you is not future promise or distant hope, but present reality. This moment, as you read these words, the full presence of divine consciousness is the awareness within you that comprehends this truth. You need not wait for more spiritual development or greater worthiness. You need not fear that you misunderstood or cannot maintain the realization. Christ consciousness is not maintained by you because it is you, and it never wavers regardless of human inconsistency. Your only task is recognition when you forget, not achievement of what already is. This recognition becomes easier and more natural with practice until it becomes your default state, rather than something requiring effort. Joel Goldsmith spent his life pointing to this one truth in countless ways, because he knew that genuine understanding of Christ in you is the liberation of humanity from every form of bondage. You have received the teaching. Now begins the lifelong joy of deepening realization through direct experience, as consciousness reveals itself to itself through your unique expression. The mystery is no longer hidden. It lives as you. If these teachings have opened your understanding to the revolutionary truth of Christ consciousness as your actual identity, like this video to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's mystical Christianity that actually transforms lives, subscribe for more content that takes you beyond religion into direct realization, and comment with, I am Christ consciousness, to declare your recognition of this truth. Your journey into living from your true nature begins now.